hammer attacks, track shoves, and fatal stabbings. Out of control violent crime on NYC subways. The real danger on NYC subways is crime, not COVID. Q-train killing threatens subway's fragile comeback. Man slashed in the face with razor on subway. Opinion: NYC subway crime is soaring because we no longer prevent it. This is gonna be a darker, grimmer episode about New York subway crime, specifically murders that take place on the subway. For a moment of levity, I'm going to point out that I am wearing a shirt with little sailboats on it, and it matches my mug. It says, "She's my sail."
Yay!
Isn't that sweet? So that's a nice moment, and now we turn to darkness. It's hard to reconcile the recent headlines about the spike in subway crime with my own experience of the subway. I should say the train. New Yorkers call it the train, not the subway.
Yeah.
I've recently started to commute again, as are a lot of New Yorkers. Offices are starting to have their workers come back. So I've only been riding the train for a month or two now on a regular basis. I feel like I really don't know what I'm talking about, so when I say I've had a good experience, take it with a big grain of salt. Wow, look at that view. Look at that shiny, clean, empty subway car. Don't ever actually get on an empty subway.
Okay.
That car is only empty because it's at the end of the line. Any New Yorker will tell you that if a train is otherwise crowded, there's just one car that's empty. When you walk onto that car, you are going to see blood, poop, or some very unwanted, unwelcome nudity. I also want to acknowledge that by saying my experiences on the subway have mostly been positive, that I am jinxing myself and something is going to go very wrong very soon. Now I'm going to take you through some of the more horrific incidents that have taken place this year so far. The year started out terribly. On New Year's Day, a man named Noel Soto was standing on the B&D platform of Fordham Road Station. Because it was New Year's, he had some kind of a noisemaker that he was honking. It seems to have attracted the attention of a group of teens. The teens approached Mr. Soto and started an altercation with him, eventually pushing him onto the tracks. A good Samaritan named Roland Houston saw what was going on and leapt onto the tracks. Soto had hit his head and doesn't remember what happened at this point, but Soto was saved only to have Houston hit by the train, and he was killed. So far, 4 teens have been arrested in connection with his murder. Noel Soto is suing the Transit Authority. According to his claim, the Transit Authority modified the station by removing existing turnstiles and replacing them with turnstiles that facilitate fare evasion. They removed personnel booths, removed personnel, and removed cameras, alarms, and other security measures. Suing the Transit Authority for $500,000. And I hope he wins.
Yeah.
On January 15th, 40-year-old Michelle Go was pushed onto the train tracks and killed by an oncoming train. The man who pushed her has a history of mental illness. He had been menacing other commuters on the platform before he pushed her. He was eventually found unfit to stand trial and has been sent to a psychiatric facility. I think what we really see with these subway pushing homicides is that New York is just not doing that good of a job of taking care of its mentally ill population. That murder has become a flashpoint for the discussion of anti-Asian hate crimes that have swept the city since COVID. The NYPD reported that attacks on Asian Americans rose 233% from 2020 to 2021. Of course, in addition to this heinous murder, there have been a lot more minor attacks against Asian people. I saw a report of a 58-year-old woman who was slapped in a subway station in the Bronx. There was also a 54-year-old woman who was beaten with bike handlebars at the 116th station on the number 1 line. Obviously, our former president didn't help with this situation.
In our war against the Chinese virus, we'll be invoking the Defense Production Act.
Why do you keep
keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China.
On April 12th, a lone gunman threw smoke grenades in the 36th Street subway station as the N train approached. This was in the morning. A lot of commuters were waiting for the train. You were on a train. That was the one day you had taken the train.
I drive there every day.
After the grenades filled the station with smoke, he opened fire on passengers. He shot 10 people, and at least 13 more were injured in the ensuing chaos. Everyone survived, luckily, but if you look at the scenes from the station that day, it's horrific. It looks like a battleground. After the shooting, in a panic, passengers went to the other side of the platform and got on the R train just so they could get away. Video shows the shooter emerging from the R train platform one stop away. So presumably, if I'm reading the situation correctly, the shooter was on the train with the people who had just fled from being shot, and I guess he had been hidden by the smoke so no one knew it was him. Later, on an R train subway car, investigators found the shooter's ID, his Glock, and the keys to his storage facility. If you notice, I'm not using his name, and that's on purpose. I agree with the school of thought that a lot of these random shooters are doing it for the notoriety and the attention, and we shouldn't give it to them. Don't say their names, don't give them a cool nickname.
Whatever guy on a stupid train.
As to his motive, this individual had posted a lot of strange, ominous social media posts prior to the shooting. Video that he posted to YouTube, he complained about homeless people on subway cars, saying, "What's happening with this homeless situation?" In another video, he said of the mayor, Eric Adams, "He can't stop no fucking crime in no subways. He might slow it down, but he ain't stopping shit. Those who gonna commit crimes like the shooting, you can't stop that. You have to have a policeman in every station. That's not possible." So he was shooting people in a protest about subway conditions?
I want to help them.
He's like, don't you see how bad the subway... Yeah, because you're on them.
You're the one that made it bad.
Good Lord. This next one's really sad. On April 24th, Marcus Bethea, I'm not sure how his last name is pronounced, was shot in the chest and killed at the Parsons Archer subway stop, which is at the end of the J line.
Trains rolled into Jamaica Center tonight and right into a crime scene, the end of the line for a 24-year-old man.
It was terrifying.
Marcus and the shooter had been in some kind of a verbal argument before the other man pulled out a gun and shot him in the chest and the groin. Marcus was what's known as a swiper, someone who illegally sells discounted subway swipes. The really sad part is it's all really sad, but one thing that I found particularly poignant was that his friend told the New York Daily Mail that Marcus had actually decided that New York City just wasn't for him, and he had bought a bus ticket to go visit his sister in Virginia.
No, he almost made it out.
He almost made it out. Not quite. I don't believe anyone has been arrested so far in connection with his murder.
Still out there, huh?
Still on the streets.
Yuck.
There was also a horrific accident in April. The bodies of 2 French tourists were found at the Sutter Avenue Rutland Road station near Brownsville. The 2 men were graffiti artists who were visiting New York specifically to do some tagging. In the graffiti world, tagging a New York subway train is kind of a rite of passage. Julien Blanc and Pierre Audebert were both struck and killed by a train. Before his death, Julien Blanc posted this picture of his graffiti art to Instagram. On May 22nd, Daniel Enriquez, a Goldman Sachs employee, was riding the train on his way to brunch when he was shot by a total stranger. Enriquez was on the northbound Q train going over the Manhattan Bridge at the time of the incident. There is no known motive. The suspect, 25-year-old Andrew Abdullah, has been apprehended. In July, a 15-year-old fatally stabbed a 14-year-old inside the 137th Street City College subway station in Manhattan. These are all the most heinous crimes that I'm aware of. There may be more, as you can imagine. It's hard to keep track of them all. Oh, I forgot one more really horrible one. This one is horrible, and it's one of my worst fears. In June, a subway rider's foot was caught in the train door, and the train dragged him to his death.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I think it's important to mention these accidental deaths, just as a reminder that the New York subway does not work how it should. It's over 100 years old, and it's just not as modern and up-to-date probably as people who are traveling from Europe or Asia might be used to. This isn't an accident or a death, but it was too gross for me to not mention. In March, a man was arrested for smearing feces into a woman's face.
Whose feces?
They didn't say. I'm sure the cop was like, what kind of feces was it?
Whose feces?
Whose feces? That man was out on bail after being arrested for committing an anti-Semitic hate crime. I'm sure that he has mental issues that need to be addressed, but they need to be addressed and not by me. I also feel like I have to mention, because we're talking a lot about violent attacks by homeless and mentally ill people, that statistically that vulnerable population is far more likely to be the victim of violent crime than to commit violent crime. In addition to people being attacked on subway platforms and being pushed in front of moving trains,
you can see the suspect approach your victim from the right of your screen and then violently push the woman wearing a red hat right into an oncoming train. The unprovoked assault captured by police body-worn cameras. 2 officers standing on the platform where it happened just after 5:30 last night arrested the suspect right away.
There are incidents called subway intrusions where someone is simply on the tracks when they shouldn't be. And in 2021, intrusions resulted in 68 deaths. Transit officials say that a lot of the people who were killed had stepped onto the tracks of their own accord. So what were they doing there? According to the New York Times, there are 29 homeless encampments in the subway tunnels. They're like between
those
stations.
Catacombs of archways that you see between platforms.
Yes.
But there's space in there. Those are the encampments.
In the shadowy recesses between stations. So they just walk along the tracks to the next station because they're used to navigating that underbelly of the city comfortably enough, and then they get trapped and get hit by a train.
Just today, the NYPD said stabbings and slashings in transit were up more than 70% year over year. Felony assaults up 33% and up more than 50% just from February to March.
While there has been a spike in crime since 2020, I wanted to emphasize that the overall picture is not as bleak. It's been increasing from a relatively low point. Crime was much worse at the end of the 90s. The late 1900s, as the kids call it. City crime overall is down 72% from 1993. Experts say that the driving force behind the recent spike in crime has to do with, obviously, the pandemic. Lower ridership is associated with higher rates of crime, and when crime goes up, it further drives people from taking the subway, meaning even lower ridership, even more crime. The two trends are reinforcing each other. Let's talk about what the New York Transit Authority could do better to prevent some of these accidental and on-purpose horrific deaths. Other cities have subway barriers. Basically, the train tracks are enclosed by sliding doors that only open once the train has arrived. The Transit Authority has said that doors like that are simply too expensive and logistically impossible for New York to implement. After Michelle Go's death, that idea was revisited. And now the MTA has committed to trying out these types of barriers in 3 subway stations.
3?
Times Square, 3rd Avenue on the L train, and the Sutphin Boulevard stop where the JFK Air Tram connects. What? You don't like those locations?
No, I mean, it's just so few. There's so many stations, and they're never going to do all the at-risk platforms, you know, in the neighborhoods at the end of the J line. Like,
right.
That's where they need it, like,
right.
where no one's looking.
Yeah, they're only going to do it in places where tourists might be.
Times Square has cameras.
The Transit Authority had also cited that there were special complexities that made these types of barriers impossible. Those complexities include, but are not limited to, availability of power to accommodate additional electrical load, multiple car classes with varying door opening positions, structural integrity of platform edges to support additional weight of the protective barriers.
Not strong enough. If you like put a tiny wall, like they'll collapse. Like that, maybe that's a problem.
The whole problem with implementing common sense barriers, safety measures, highlights an overarching theme in the New York subway, which is that it's ancient, it's decrepit, it's dilapidated, it's a mess. Its infrastructure is so old and it's never going to be repaired, frankly, I don't think. Everything in New York, like with the scaffolding that's on all the buildings, they're just going to keep sort of taping and gluing and putting flimsy plywood on the outside of the problem until the thing that's inside just crumbles away into dust. That's how I see this playing out. But they're going to try it in these 3 stations and hopefully it'll go great and they'll agree that it's easy and fine and wonderful. In response to this upswing in crime, Mayor Eric Adams' response has been to increase police presences in subway stations. There have also been some very unpopular moves against buskers. For instance, a beloved saxophonist named Jazz Ajilo was recently arrested for the crime of refusing to show ID.
Is that a crime?
Jazz is known for his animatronic cats that he likes to display. His Instagram is incredible. The police said that they had also given him multiple warnings. I'm not sure what the multiple warnings were about. After his arrest, he was able to raise $100,000, and since last I checked, he's back at the Herald Square stop, doing what only he can do. Eric Adams said of Jazz's arrest, "I'm proud of those officers. They weren't abusive, they didn't yell at the person. They took a long time to get to that point that now we have to take action." Action against what? Like, he's back at the station. Like, clearly whatever he was doing wasn't actually a problem. There's some energy going in the wrong direction with this current mayor.
How do you feel about the white community?
They're just normal to me. I feel like everybody's just normal.
Facts. How do you feel about the black community?
My son is half black.
And how do you feel about Eric Adams' community?
He sucks.
Andrew, how do we safely navigate the subway?
We don't.
We
book our parking online and we drive there.
My number 1 tip for visitors to New York is as soon as you get here, find a man with a car and marry him. When you're waiting for the train, stand to the middle of the platform. It's really tempting to stand on the edge and see, like, is that train coming yet? I've been here for 12 minutes and it's hot and stinky. Don't do it. Stay in the middle. Stay in the middle, firmly planted. Make sure, like, a wide stance. Wide stance, arms in, nothing to grab onto.
Your safety is important to us. Please stand away from the platform edge, especially when trains enter and leave the station.
hot safety tip I forgot to mention while we were recording. Don't look at your phone while you're walking around. That'll put you way ahead of most people in terms of getting around NYC safety. You don't want to be absorbed in whatever's going on in your phone like some kind of YouTuber moron airhead. Okay, that's it. Since living in New York, I've noticed that the thing people love to say about New York the most is, it's over. It's never coming back. It's never gonna be the same. It's done. It's finished. Stick a fork in it. The subway, like New York, is big and bad. But much like Wall Street, it's also too big to fail. There are simply too many people riding it for it to ever truly go away or fall into total disuse. At least not until the actual apocalypse.
No more feces.
No more feces.
At least not on the train.
At least not on the train.
I'm sure there'll be more feces.
I'm running for mayor. Feces free 2023.